the first official Restream podcast of the Door Report. And we'll get a sponsorship out here for Restream, Will, with over 8 million broadcasts and over 600 million viewers engaged monthly. Restream is the number one tool to increase your live audience organically. So, Will, this is something new, of course, but we're just going to act as if we're still on Zoom and get going and recording.
Number one tool. That's nice. Yeah.
Number one tool to increase your live audience organically. All right, Will, here we go. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I said, Billy, that it's going to be funny for sure because we're going to try to run through this, and we always record, no issues, never have to go back through and edit out any parts or cut out any parts that inevitably something is going to happen. I know it is because we haven't done anything live. So
it's probably going to do it. So we got Twitter, we got Twitter live, we got YouTube live right now. Will, this is weird, but let's get it going. Let's get it going. We're going to start here in about 2 seconds with the live podcast. All right, welcome into the Door Report. It is episode 160. It is April 25th, 2022. We are powered by the great folks at Alaco Finewood Floors. And, Will, the VandyBoys take the series over Kentucky 2-1, 2-3. And it was a tough, grinded out series, especially Saturday and Sunday. Friday, they got the combined no-hitter from Chris McElvain and Christian Little, the two Chris's. We're going at it there for Vanderbilt. But Will, they got the win over Kentucky. Now they got two straight SEC series victories under their belt. And for this type of team, they're young. That matters. Like that matters, Will. And so I think this will carry them a little bit further than of course anything else would. But they got the win, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, the bats got going a little bit. Obviously, You saw that in the first game, and they won the two games in a little bit different fashion. They dominated on Friday. Then, of course, lost the game. The offensive output wasn't great in game two, and then came back, and I saw a lot of tweets, including I think maybe you put one out about this being such a huge game because it came down on Sunday against Kentucky, not just for that series, but for this team to remain at 500 after this Kentucky series. So to make it to 9-9 versus 8-10, something about that 9-9 just feels a lot better. Like you're in a better place.
It feels a lot better than 8-10,
especially where this team started. I mean, they've won 6 out of the last 7. Things seem to be going in the right direction. And it's interesting. Tim Corbin had some quotes. So I've got to find him here before we get to it, but about that rotation in the bullpen and Christian Little maybe settling in to where he's going to end up there.
And then also Nick Maldonado is back, Will. That was a big one, big guy, big figure, key figure we talked about before this season, that if they're able to have Maldonado at his best, this team's at a different level. So we'll get into baseball. We'll recap the Vanderbilt-Kentucky series from this weekend. We'll touch a little bit on the A&M series this weekend, Will. It's throwback weekend at the Hawk. So I think it's Dollar Dog Night on Thursday night. So I think that should get a few more fans there inside the Hawk. But Will, I know you've got a little bit of football we'll also touch on, but Rhett Wiseman is going to join us a little bit later here on TDR After Dark. Got a lot going on. It's our first try. Just take us lightly, everybody. This is something. This is off the cuff. So don't write this home. Nothing to write home about. But hey, we're probably gonna look back at this one, Will, and say, hey, we improved a little bit.
Yeah, and Billy, you decided to. We had this signed up, I think, before episode 159. So we had this signed up before the last episode, which we had so much to talk about. You had the spring game, we had baseball, we had basketball transfer news, we had Scottie Pippen Jr. announcing that he was going to be entering the NBA draft and the fallout from that, and where this team was going to go. In this episode, we have VandyBoys news, but other than that, it's a little light on the Vanderbilt news cycle here. But I guess that's a good test, so it'll be a little bit shorter.
Yeah, it's a good
less
test.
time for things to go wrong.
That would have been a 3-hour restream. That would have been interesting. It probably would have blown up on us. But well, before we get to the breaking news, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @door_report, where we're actually streaming live right now, and Instagram door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're actually live there as well. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcast. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. It's now time for the breaking news. All right, Will, let's it's funny, I'm looking at the old script. We got Scottie Pippen enters the NBA draft. No, it's a little bit after that, but we're going to start with baseball, Will. The VandyBoys take 2 of 3 from Kentucky, and I know we're all fancy here with that little subscript there. We're gonna see how that goes today. But
nice.
But Will, first SEC series victory on the road all season. This team hasn't had a road series victory all year up until this one against Kentucky, which kind of surprised me. There's certain stats this year that you see, and it just kind of surprises you a little bit about this team. But now they're 28-11 overall, 9-9 in SEC play. But, Will, they're still not ranked. They're not in the top 25 yet, according to D1Baseball.com. But the funny thing is, Will, they are 8th in the RPI. Like they're a top 10 team according to the RPI rankings. But in college baseball, I think that's a little bit different. Like if this was basketball, Vanderbilt would definitely still be a top 15 team in the rankings, but they're not. And their overall body of work is really solid. But lately here in SEC play, there's not quite enough for the D1 baseball guys to have them ranked. But Will, if they're able to get this win against Texas A&M, I believe they'd be ranked. And I mean, would you agree? I mean, they get a win over Kentucky and you string a couple together, but we never know with the D1 baseball guys. I know we had Mike Rooney on. He was like, hey, you got do it one more time. They did against Kentucky, but there's so many good baseball teams at this time of year, especially. I mean, you've got a lot of non-conference teams, mid-major teams that are in that top 25. So I think they'd be ranked. I don't know if you'd agree if after they beat A&M.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not and they win that series, that would be three straight series wins in the SEC, as well as picking up your midweek games, which they have Louisville coming up as well, which is a bigger midweek game than normal when you're playing one of these smaller conference schools. So that will also factor in a little bit more than a normal game that you would have there. So if they're not, maybe have a talk with Mike for sure, because I think they should. But if anybody out there is listening for the first time, baseball, I will say
everything about it is different.
This is the time of year as well that I'm getting back into it a little bit more, that basketball's really shut down and moving forward. The spring game's done. So this is when my focus shifts to baseball. And so that is also why, Billy, I'm not extremely excited. This is our first live episode here. I wish I had more written down. I wish I would have had more time to sit down and run through things. But this series coming up is massive for them as far as if they want to be even considered as a regional host site at the end of the season, or even at this point. Really, they were teetering at one point on thinking maybe not even at that 2 line, so much less a regional host site. So this team has a lot of work to do towards the end of the season, but when you play a lot of good teams in the SEC, that's a lot of opportunities to improve your postseason rankings and improve your stock there for that bid.
Yeah, and Will, they've got their toughest stretch coming up here of the season. Got A&M this weekend. You got 2 straight road series against top 20 teams at Georgia, who's second in the SEC East right now, and then at Arkansas, who's first in the West right now. So we're really going to see what this team is made of. All 4 of their next series, you got LSU there at the end at home. All 4 of their next series against those teams, they're ranked in the top 25. And they've all got better conference records than Vanderbilt. So it's going to be a huge stretch, Will, to see really what this team and this kind of, this young team is made of. And I'm going to start with, Spencer Jones, Will, had a great weekend. I'm going to give him credit. He had a good game against your Golden Eagles at Tennessee Tech. He hit 375 over the last 4-game stretch, 2 doubles, 6 RBIs. He collected a hit in all 4 games as well, and 3 extra base hits. So Spencer Jones, another guy that they just need. They need him to stay at the top, but they also need that bottom part of the lineup, Will, to start carrying their end of the bargain a little bit more. Devin Futrell, Will, is interesting. And I want to talk about him because he has won every single midweek game he started. He's 8-0. I mean, he's been perfect. He held Tennessee Tech scoreless over 6 innings, allowed only 3 hits, had 6 strikeouts. He's 8-0 on the season. He's got 50 strikeouts and 5 walks. Will, we've seen this before we've seen it with Walker Buehler in 2014. We've seen it with Mason Hickman back in 2018, where they start in the midweek and they dominate. They roll through the midweek teams, and then Corbin plugs them in Hoover, or plugs them in a regional and a super regional, and they end up playing well. So, Will, I know Corb said Devin Futrell will probably rest this week. He said that tonight on the coach's show. But, Will, if I'm Corbin, how do you put him in earlier? Like, do you insert him into a weekend, maybe a Saturday, maybe a Sunday, maybe a bullpen start a little bit earlier, just because of they might need these wins? Like you were talking about it, they may need him earlier than the postseason.
Well, you're talking as if this pitching rotation is set, and there's really anything that I think Tim Corbin's decided on when it comes to key games or when they get into crunch time. And I don't think that anybody really has fully proven out that outside of maybe you could say McIlvain and Christian Little now moving into the rotation there and out of the bullpen and Maldonado coming back. But there's not a lot of things other than those three guys really that you've seen that you would say I am 100% confident. And correct me if I'm wrong there, Billy. Do you have anybody else there that you would view and say I'm confident them stepping out in postseason play?
I mean, I think you're talking the whole rotation. You're talking McIlvain, Holton, and Cunningham. And they've gone with the last 2 weeks.
Who are you outside of McIlvain there? Are you fully confident there?
Not really. If I'm a Vandy fan, I'm not. Carter Holton has pitched well at times, but he's also struggled at times. He's lost 3 games. You've seen the Sunday roll. They've been, Bryce Cunningham has been thrown in there the last couple weeks, but they haven't seemed to be able to find any sort of rhythm, especially Sunday. And then there's a lot of shuffling. There's a ton of shuffling. So, Will, that's why I asked you. Because, maybe this is a situation where Futrell is inserted maybe in the series against LSU, maybe a little bit earlier because of simply they need him, because of numbers. I mean, there's a couple injuries before this season. Sam Laboki and Matthew Doolin, who haven't pitched all season. They were supposed to be big guys in this rotation. So that's why I asked. Well, I think it's a question. Now, I don't think Corbin will do it because he's Tim Corbin, and he has shown that he's going to let his guys ride out through the regular season, and they are going to forget. They're going to throw everything that's happened in the regular season out the door, and then they're ready for the postseason. So that's a good question, Will. I think I think that's up for discussion. I really do.
I think we talk a lot about pitching, and I think that's what we've focused on as well, because we always tend to focus on that with Vanderbilt, because pitching is typically what has carried them into their championship runs, into their postseason play. But there are some guys in specific that I keep waiting on them to turn the corner, to start hitting the ball better, and their names. And when I was listening to last episode in the interview segment 2, you guys ran through some of those names that are names. And I think he put it that way. He said, these are names
that
brands. Should be hitting better. And Carter Young is so good in the field, but he's just not hitting the ball well. His average is low. Javier Vaz, especially in SEC play, his numbers have dropped down. You're carried by the top of that lineup right now, and you just don't have at the bottom of that order guys that you think are going to be able to knock runs in, especially late in games. And that's what's really hamstrung this team more than the pitching, that it hasn't been up to the standards of 2 guys drafted in the top 5 and Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker, but the pitching staff's been pretty good. And I think just the offensive consistency, and it feels like just Groundhog Day over and over and over, that we have the same conversations at the same times of the year. And this feels a lot like last year with just, and I don't mean this in any condescending way, but this feels like a lot like last year without the pitching hype and the pitching guy and the guys and the arms there. Instead, you're just a notch down. Yeah. And when you're a notch down with an inconsistent offense, you're going to be teetering on that top 25 on that edge. And Vanderbilt had a tough schedule to start out SEC play and weren't playing their best baseball. So I don't think that we have a super big concern moving forward, as far as I think this team is getting back on track, and we're watching it happen when Vanderbilt fans would like to see it happen. But is this team built for a run? That is something that I think maybe temper expectations on, that not every year, even though that has become the expectation, not every single season is a guaranteed team that you look at and say, this is a team that can not only make it to Omaha, but make a run in Omaha at a national championship. That's a really high bar to reach just year in, year out. I know Vanderbilt has done it since about 2012, or about that time, but there are going to be years when just you say this is a team that probably caps out at the super regional. And I think right now, unless something changes on the offensive side, that's just what's going to happen as the dog breaks in on the live stream. He does appearance. He does that pretty regularly on the normal podcast. It's just usually there's not much video, so you just hear the nails clacking for a second. I love it. But I'm going to go ahead and boot him out here.
Hey, that's okay. But Will, you talked about. I mean, we've been spoiled. Vandy fans have been spoiled with what Tim Corbin has been able to do. I mean, it feels like every single season for the past 5, 6, 7 years, they've been there in the postseason, and they've been a threat to be reckoned with. I mean, force to be reckoned with. I mean, that's what it's been. And this year, that right now, I think they are a team. A lot can happen. I think they're a team that caps out at a super. Now, I'm not saying that's where they're at. They're going to be at the end, but that's kind of what it's looking like right now. But there's still a lot to happen. Will, we're going to get to a little update here on Nick Maldonado, kind of a status update on
I
Mr.
liked that
Maldonado.
graphic, Billy. That was well
You like that?
timed.
You like
That
that
was nice.
transition there?
Yeah, that was really
Will,
nice.
Maldonado is slowly progressing. He had limited work versus Kentucky. He will be needed this weekend against A&M. Corbin had a quote tonight. They wanted to get him into the 30s, his pitch count into the 30s. I think he pitched somewhere under 20 pitches his last appearance a couple weekends ago. He was at the 30 pitch mark, but Will, he's a preseason All-American. Yeah, I mean this is a guy that coming into this season, we didn't know if he was going to start. We didn't know if he was going to come out of the pen, but we saw initially with the first rotation, Maldonado starting on game 2, the Saturday starter. And you saw Holton on Sunday, but we've seen a lot of fluctuation there. So just wanted to throw that out there. He's slowly progressing, Will. And Nick Maldonado is a guy that they're going to need this weekend. I mean, they are going to need him. So that's just a quick little update on Maldonado. Well, before we get to football, I do want to touch a little bit on Texas A&M this weekend. It is throwback weekend at the Hawk, and Thursday night. It starts on a Thursday night. That one's going to be a 7 o'clock first pitch on ESPNU. It is Dollar Dog Night at Hawkins Field. And Will, A&M is coming off a huge series win over Arkansas. They took 2 out of 3 from Arkansas last weekend. A&M is ranked number 21 in the country right now. They're 10-8 in the SEC, 4th place right now in the SEC West. For Vanderbilt, you touched on it, Will. I think if Vanderbilt wants to host a regional, this is a series they have to win. Because if you don't win this one, then you're starting to go into the rabbit hole of at Georgia, at Arkansas, and then LSU at home. So this is a game they need to have, Will. And it feels like this team plays better at the Hawk. It just does. They took 2 out of 3 from Florida. They got swept versus Tennessee, but they didn't play awful. I mean, yes, Tennessee swept them. But that's one of the games and series I think Tennessee looks back at and says, "Hey, that was a tough series to win, a tough place to win." So A&M's coming in here, Will, this weekend. We're not going to do predictions. I think we will have one more later this week for predictions. But before we get to football, Will, real quick here, A&M, this is one they need to have. That's just kind of the feeling. If you don't, then you got to try to steal one against Arkansas or LSU or Georgia, and all 3 of those teams I think are better than A&M. So they need this one, Will. They really do.
I mean, it's pretty crazy when you look at the SEC and the standings and watch the teams, how sandwiched you have about 7 teams in there. You have Arkansas, who's kind of in tier 2, and then Tennessee, who, it pains me to say it, but is in a tier of their own right now at 17-1. So they just are. And so you have tier 1 is 1 team, tier 2 is 1 team, and then tier 3 is 7 teams, and then tier 4 is the remainder of the conference. So this is against one of those teams that are all sandwiched in there. I'm putting Mississippi State in there, even though I think they're 8-10. I don't have the standings pulled up in front of me.
They are 10-8, 10-8, yeah.
10-8, okay.
Yeah,
well, not A&M. I meant Mississippi State. I'm
Mississippi
including
State,
the 7 teams. They're 8-10. Sorry, the maroon. There's too many maroon teams. Okay, that's just my opinion, but. You've got a game against one of those teams you're sandwiched in the middle of, and you have an opportunity, which is to move up in those rankings and separate yourself out. If you don't pick up this series this weekend, you're probably not going to be sitting in a spot better than probably 5th place in the conference, just looking at the schedule ahead, setting realistic expectations. So this is about as big of a series as was last weekend. And the weekend before, Vanderbilt has not set themselves up in a spot like they normally have, where they have a lot of margin for error. And that's it's an issue to do with youth. Yeah. And no, well, yeah, a fact of the matter, Billy. I stumbled over my words, but you didn't have to jump in. You saw the brain churning after dark. It's been a long day. But they have some youth, and that is why they are struggling right now. You're trying to replace 2 superstars, and you just don't replace 2 superstars effortlessly. And that's more than just the arms and the pitching. That was the focus. That was the storyline week in, week out, was how did Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker perform if Carter Young's struggling to hit the ball, or Javier Vaz is on a cold streak, or if Spencer Jones goes on a 4 or 5 game cold streak. That's not what is being written about and talked about as to what is going on with this team. All of the focus is on those guys. So it takes a lot of pressure off the rest of the team. So even though I think it was a couple episodes ago, you said something about this team having a lot of guys that have experience, and a lot of these guys are coming back and do have experience in big time games and big time moments and playing on winning teams. But these guys don't have experience being the guy on those winning teams. And I think Enrique Bradfield does. And so I think this is just him stepping back into that role. And you've seen some guys step up, Tate Colwick early, Dominic Keegan, Jack Bolger seems to be moving in that direction a little bit, but you haven't seen enough guys to step in and fill the role of this mammoth cavity that was left, honestly, by Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter. It's really about as big as what was left after the class with Dansby Swanson and all of them graduated. I mean, you're having to replace the entire face of your program once again, and Enrique Bradfield can't do it alone. So that's where this team sits. They're just waiting on guys to emerge. Spencer Jones looks like he's stepping in there. McElvain looks like he's kind of moving in there, but you need one or two more guys, and that's going to be the difference in this team. Like capping at the super regionals or being able to move a little bit further, and we say capping at super regionals, like that's a given. That's certainly not a given for this team to make it there, but hopefully this team and these guys can grow into these roles. They seem to be settling somewhat into their roles, but it'll be interesting to move forward. And Texas A&M is going to be a hell of a way to start and see. Be a good testing ground.
Yeah, and Will, right now this team is going to be on the road in a regional. Like that's where they're at right now. Now, if they beat A&M, I think if they go 2-2, then these next four, it depends on if they sweep. I think there's a lot that can still happen, especially in Hoover. But if they go 2-2 this next stretch, I think you can be pretty confident. Depends on who they beat. But no matter what, I mean, all four of these next teams will likely host, other than maybe A&M. So, I mean, there's still a ton that can happen in this baseball season. That's how long it is. And real quick here, Will, we forgot to mention the combined no-hitter from Chris McElvain. I know. I can't.
That was like the only thing I wrote down on our Google Doc here beforehand. That was, I think, the only thing that I typed in was to make sure to touch on that, and then we somehow skipped over it.
I can't believe it, but Chris McElvain and Christian Little combined for a no-hitter in probably the most boring way possible, in probably a crowd of like 150 people that were still there in Lexington. So it wasn't the most electric. The video was kind of funny. You couldn't really hear anything. You could hear a few of the Vandy fans clapping after it, but I thought it was kind of funny watching that. But because of the performance, McElvain won SEC Pitcher of the Week. 7 shutout innings from him, Will. Picked up his 5th win of the year, 9 strikeouts. That's the highest for him in an SEC game. And Will, interesting stat here. This is the first combined no-hitter for Vanderbilt since 4 pitchers combined to do it in 2003. That was Jensen Lewis, Nick Pilkington, John Scott, and Matt Bushman. That was back in 2003 on the road at Western Kentucky. So, Vandy, they're making history, but it felt like that was.
I was hoping you would ask me that. I was hoping you would ask me that as a trivia.
When was the last time?
Billy. Yeah, I was like, I've got him. I've got it. He's going to ask me, when do you think that was? And I'm going to actually know the answer, but unfortunately, you went ahead and read it off.
I think that might have been Corbin's first year. It was either his first or second year, so really, really early. Do a little research there. Was 2003 Tim Corbin's first season at Vanderbilt? We've got our first research look up.
2003 was his first season.
Yeah, that was his first season, and that's the first time any Vanderbilt pitchers have combined for a no-hitter. So all the way back in 2003, you got to go back there. So yeah, that happened Friday night. They were not able to win Saturday. They lost 3-2, but they ended up winning the series 5-3. That was their first rubber match victory of all season. So Vanderbilt's kind of starting, like you said, Willa. I like what you said about it feels like they're starting to find a rhythm, round into form, with a lot of these younger guys taking over leadership positions. Like that's not easy in any sport. I mean, I think we saw it this past season with basketball. We're still maybe starting to see it with football, but I don't think we're close there. And then, I mean, you look at baseball, that's where they're at right now. So I think we're kind of starting to see it. Well, I know we said we would talk about football. I'm not sure if you actually have anything on football. I know Gabe Dorsey entered the transfer portal, so that's some news on the basketball front. All I had for the titles here was baseball, but Will, let's get to football first. Let's get to Will's football kind of spring status report. Here we go. What's the latest, Will?
I mean, pretty much there's no latest. I mean, I was just going to bring up some questions for you now that we've had a chance to kind of sit back and see some quotes and get the feel of everything and the feel of Twitter. And since there was really not a ton outside of baseball, we've beaten that dry, run that completely dry, every ounce of it. So to football, how much of a QB battle do you think there really is? Because Clark Lee, of course, is playing it up with some quotes here that I'm reading, going to quote from an article from Robbie Weinstein, if he is out
Thanks,
there.
Robbie.
Thank you, Robbie. We always say it. Thank you, Robbie.
Yep.
Check him out on 247sports.com and go and subscribe as well. But going into the quotes, I really didn't think that he would give quotes in this way, showing that there was a quarterback battle. I thought he wouldn't say that Mike Wright was going to be the starter week one, because what tactical advantage is it to come out and say that you have a running quarterback as your starting quarterback? You might as well say that we're really looking into every option, especially since all three guys really do have a slightly different style. But some of the quotes were a little bit interesting. He said he was pleased with all three today. And I'm not going to go through and read the entirety of all of these quotes, but there's one in particular about AJ Swan that kind of caught my eye, because specifically I know that when we did the recap of the spring game last episode with where we ran through the notes from the spring game that had just happened, we talked about the interception that AJ Swan threw, and we talked about that was just a play that was a freshman play, that was a guy that was playing high school football last year. He just completely got fooled by the coverage that wasn't even really disguised that heavily. But he said, and let me find it here because my laptop screen is moving back and forth. He said, in quote, "Then I thought," and this is Coach Clark Lee, "then I thought AJ, honestly, he had the interception early, but I like that. Let's take risks. Let's bet on ourselves and take shots and learn from that. I thought he showed some athleticism in the back half of the scrimmage, evading the rush and stepping up in the pocket. He's able to find receivers down the field as a result. That's always a good thing." So that was the interesting part of the quote, was the first part there, talking about the interception, because I am curious how much of that is Clark Lee not wanting to kill the confidence of AJ Swan publicly by saying you just can't make that throw, and how much of that is really him looking at what AJ Swan did and saying, is that risk worth the reward? Of saying that there were some plays that AJ Swan made in that spring game that were throws that simply no one else on that team would have or could have made.
The deep ball.
It was just his quick release and his timing. His release is just quicker than everyone, so that ball gets out there just a little bit quicker on those screens, on those bubble screens, getting the ball out to McGowan, getting the ball out to Will Shepherd. It just comes out at a half second quicker, and the timing just works better. So, but you've got to take the good with the bad. With the gunslinger is going to come interceptions like that. And I think he can reduce those, but we watched a lot of AJ Swan film and a lot of his highlights from high school, and that's just part of his game. So it's going to improve, and he's going to throw a lot of interceptions, especially early in his career before he's had a chance to get a lot of experience. But that's just going to be part of it, because if people remember, Jay Cutler threw a hell of a lot of interceptions when he was at Vanderbilt. He definitely fit a lot of balls into spots, that including that legendary slant pass to Earl Bennett that he caught in Neyland Stadium in 2005. But remember that ball probably shouldn't have ever been thrown. Every single coach and how he threw it in the history of quarterback coaching would have said, no way in hell should you have thrown that football. And he made throws that at times at Vanderbilt, you said, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why would you ever think to make that throw? So can Clark Lee, and he's a defensive coach, live with the fact that that's going to happen if you play a freshman quarterback? So that quote is what stuck out, because he also had a quote talking about Mike Wright. We know what Mike Wright can do. And he said that on that first drive, you saw exactly what Mike Wright brings to the table that nobody else brings to the table. I said at the beginning that AJ Swan is the guy that makes throws that no one else can make. Well, Mike Wright makes plays that nobody else can make. He gets away from pressure and provides an elusiveness that allows the offensive line to make those mistakes. And it's not completely detrimental to every single drive, every single time that they allow an edge rusher to get through. It's not just crumpling to the ground, because this offensive line may struggle to protect the quarterback, especially in SEC play, just like every year. But this year in particular, it may be a struggle for them. They're young. They're running a new offense. They're going to try to negate that by hitting some quick patterns a little bit more than they did last year. I think they learned from their mistakes of trying to have plays that develop too long down the field. But we'll see. There's a lot of time. There's a lot of time.
A lot of time.
A lot of practice. A lot of things to happen. A lot of growing up to do for AJ Swan. And really both these guys, because this is the first year that I think Mike Wright's going into a quarterback battle as the lead horse, as the guy that if you had to put your money down on who you thought was going to be the starting quarterback, I think a majority of Vanderbilt fans would say Mike Wright. And that wasn't the case last year. It was the complete flip side. I think that we both said that Ken Seals was likely going to be the guy. So how is Mike Wright going to progress with that? He has a lot of growing up to do. And then AJ Swan, of course, he's supposed to be going to prom right now, and he's competing for not just the backup job, but according to these quotes,
The
like
job.
Clark Lee, which how much can you take? The starting quarterback job. So AJ Swan, he can look like a completely different guy, or he can take the route of Alan Walters and fade away into oblivion. That's a little bit of a stray there, but yeah, I mean, there's a ton of other examples of guys that have come in with a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work out for whatever reason that was. But I don't think AJ Swan's going to be a guy like that. Just from what I saw on Saturday, and I
From
know
the tape.
you probably
from
have
the
a
tape,
similar opinion from watching it the highlights of that spring game.
the tape says otherwise. Like this guy, I mean, we talked about Alan Walters coming in. I think we talked about Ken Seals coming in. It's like, whoa, these guys jump off the page. I like that arm. I like that deep ball. But AJ Swan, you saw some different types of things. You saw the flick of the wrist. You saw the ball, how quick it got out of his arm. You saw him rolling right or rolling left. And these are huddle highlights. Like, these are not the best quality. You could still tell about everything, all the movements, with the arm and the legs. I mean, it just felt like it was all there. Now, mentally, is it all there yet? Obviously not. He's a freshman. He's going to make freshman mistakes. And I'm not saying he's going to play this year, Will, but I'm going to mark it down. You will see AJ Swan in game action this season. I don't think now, as much as Vanderbilt fans I think there are fans out there that would like to see him, maybe start right away, like the Shermer thing. We've talked about that. But Kyle Shermer, who was in front of Kyle Shermer? Will, like, who was
you had
like
Steven, you had a plethora of quarterbacks that played over Kyle Shermer. You had Steven
Rivers,
Steven Rivers. You had Patton Robinette was the initial starter,
yeah,
and got injured. You had, I believe that what was
Wade Freebeck.
Freebeck, that was his name. Yep, I think McCrary was still in the roster as well those years. So yeah, you had a lot of guys that were tested out before Derrick Mason decided to settle on Shermer. But credit to Derrick Mason on keeping, because going into, I think it was even his junior season, Kyle Shermer was not this universally, he had the starting job going. He wasn't a universally like, this is the guy that's going to start until he graduates. That wasn't the case. So we've been pretty harsh on this podcast before he was let go and about how Derrick Mason left the state of the program. But I wanted to I like to give credit when there is credit to give, because there are places that Derrick Mason did good things. And one of those was sticking with a starting quarterback, because I think a lot of times coaches get trigger happy on pulling guys. And this isn't just because
and we've seen it at Vandy a lot.
And it isn't just that they made the right or the wrong decision. It's that once you pull a guy one time, he's done. Like that, there are very few guys that can go out and play that position of quarterback knowing that one mistake is going to send them to the bench and send another guy out there. It's why I hate the 2 quarterback rotation thing, because it doesn't allow guys to get into rhythm. It's like if you had a shooter in basketball and you were like, go in, but if you miss a shot, you're coming right back out. That is not a way to see the best. And once you do it one time, it's over. Then there's no instilling that and getting that out of the back of the player's mind. So that is what I don't want Clark Lee to do. That is what if he goes with AJ Swan, he has to go with AJ Swan. And that's the problem, is if he goes and makes that decision. I think with Mike Wright, you could almost say, hey, we're going to shift the role to where AJ Swan is going to be more involved and you're going to run packages. I don't think you can do it the other way. I think if you go out with Swan, that role can only increase for him over Mike Wright. It can't then say you were running 60% of possessions or 70. Now we're going to take you back to 40. You can't do that. So it's a bigger risk to go with Swan. It's a higher reward, because you saw what allowing the development of a young quarterback at Vanderbilt can do, and what Kyle Shermer was able to do in his junior and senior seasons, and the talent that was around him and the chemistry that was built. That's really, especially early before these classes can really get rolling when you're a team like Vanderbilt in the SEC. And Derrick Mason got blasted for what he said, and you can't say it, and that's the problem. But he said it. What did he say? It was in waves or
Yeah, it
whatever it
goes in
was.
cycles.
It goes in cycles, and what he said isn't wrong. He just was awful at saying it. He was saying
Well,
that when
you can't say it in general. I mean, it's everyone knows it's true, but as a coach at Vanderbilt, you just can't say it. Like you just
he
can't.
could have even said it in
a
a
different
way of
way.
being
Yeah.
in a way of saying, like, in the same way that a tornado is built with the first gust is you go in a cycle, but then your cycle gets higher. Every team goes in cycles. Georgia goes in cycles. Georgia just had probably the greatest defense in the history of college football, especially statistically. But they're going to be a little bit down next year. It's just their bottom of the cycle is like
a little bit different.
Like 10-2, 9-3 is their bottom of the barrel versus Vanderbilt bottoming out is going 2-10 and losing to FCS, ETSU, and 0-9 in the prior season where it was only SEC play. So there's just different ways. But right now, Clark Lee seems to be on the uptick side. I don't think this year is going to be the high point of a cycle, obviously, but you feel like you're building the momentum to maybe in year, I guess it would be team 2, I guess we could say it, because that was team 0, but team 2, year 3. That was going is we've been calling it team 0 there at the beginning, but team 2 in year 3, that's when you can see the real uptick and maybe a win total, because this year, Billy, I mean, you look at the SEC schedule, it's pretty brutal, and that's why we keep hitting on it. We're going to keep hitting on it, but the win total at best may increase by 1 game, and that would be like not just a step, that would be a leap forward. If this team was able to win 3 games, that would be a lot more than just winning 1 more game. That would really be a huge step forward.
Yeah, I think this season we talked about last season, not judging wins and losses. I think the bar shifts to, yes, we're going to be judging wins and losses, but not to the degree of we would be doing in year 3 or 4 for Clark Lee. Like,
I think it's competitiveness this year is even more so than last year's. They shouldn't be getting blown out in these games.
Right. Yeah, we get to year 3, year 4, then it's like, okay, maybe 4 or 5 wins, 6 wins. Like, we're going to legitimately putting out a number. I'm not saying we can't put out a number this year, but, say they go 2-10 again. I don't know if that's, is that a step back? I mean, it's
going to depend on what kind of 2-10 it is. Is it a 2-10 that you saw last season where you felt like the team improved, but just at a higher level, that they didn't start out from the basement like they did last year, that you felt like they were on an upward trajectory? But if you can start from that same trajectory and come out and win a game against Hawaii and, God forbid, beat your FCS opponent and start out the year 2-0, even if you did rattle off 10 losses, which would be very, very, very unfortunate, even if you're able to be just in every game except maybe against Georgia, that you can just be competitive. I know that is such a low bar, and I hate that the words are coming out of my mouth because I hate moral victories. I hate everything about it, and I'm talking about it right now. But I can't, and I say it over and over, there is no lower place than this team was in 2020 in the COVID year when they went 0-9 and literally didn't finish the season. They had to forfeit. They forfeited the season, and they had a female kicker, and they forfeited the season. Like, that is bottom of the barrel, as low as it gets. And then you lose to your FCS opponent, and it was like a new depth of hell that I didn't even know was possible to reach as a Vanderbilt point. It's like every time you reach the basement floor, it's like it just keeps getting lower. It's like it just builds you up with a little bit, and it's like
another level,
smacks you in the face. So that's where we're coming from, and that's why I hate moral victories. It's all you have. You're not going to jump from where they were being historically at as low a point as Vanderbilt football has ever been, which is a tough statement to make, but it's true. You don't go from that to immediately saying, my goals are wins. Your goals are to have little moral victories, and then hopefully those can translate in year 3, year 4, year 5 into actual victories and actual wins. Because in football, it just isn't going to be like basketball. It just isn't going to be 1 class. It isn't going to be 2 classes. It really isn't even going to be 3 classes. It's going to be a long cycle, because Derrick Mason was right on that quote, even though he got blasted and it was a terrible quote. Cycles.
Derrick
And that first cycle, it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. He was wrong on a lot of stuff. He was right on that one, so I'll give him credit on that. And for some reason, Derrick Mason's coming up a lot in our first live stream episode. I don't think we've talked about him
we've
in a
mentioned
lot of
Derrick
episodes, but
Mason
here
more
he
than we
is.
have
Yeah.
Clark Lee. It's that's not maybe not great news, but that's where we're at right now with the Door Report. But Will, you mentioned basketball. That transitions us perfectly. We're going to talk a lot more about football, but that transitions us perfectly to our last topic. Gabe Dorsey enters the transfer portal. And Will, it's kind of interesting looking at Jerry Stackhouse's recruiting class now. His first signing class, they're all gone. Peyton Daniels, gone. Shane Dezzoni, gone. And now you've got Gabe Dorsey, gone. So, Will, this is not some sort of heat wave of a transfer. Like this is not shaking the Vanderbilt basketball program. But what it does is it opens up a spot. One more spot has been opened, if I'm not mistaken. I could be awfully wrong about that, but yes, there is another spot open.
You're right.
And so, Will, what does that do now? I mean, I hate that we're talking about Gabe Dorsey and now we just go all of a sudden to the new spot that's open, but that's where we're at. I mean, Gabe Dorsey coming into Vanderbilt, we thought, I don't know how much, I think both of us were kind of undecided on how much he might play, but he was a talented kid coming out of high school. I mean, Stackhouse's class, Will, we forget about it. Peyton Daniels, Dezzoni, and Dorsey, those weren't your run-of-the-mill, 3 stars. I mean, they were talented kids. I mean, we forget about that. Yes, they you could say they were your run-of-the-mill 3 stars, but at Vanderbilt,
they were the definition of your run-of-the-mill 3-star class.
I mean,
I'm sorry, that's
you look at the schools, you look at their ratings,
But there's a reason. There's a reason we're excited about this class coming up, and we weren't excited
and
because no one was excited about that. This is like, I want to be kind, but there's a reason they're transferring out, and there's a reason that Dezzoni landed at St. Joseph's and didn't go to Kentucky. Like, that's
and
what I'm
Peyton
saying.
Daniels,
It's the same thing with football. Is that a guy is probably leaving the program, and your program is losing a piece that it should not have lost when they transfer up. And that's across all levels. That's from Belmont to wherever they go to Vanderbilt. And that's why I'm not concerned with the guys transferring out in basketball. I'm not waving a panic flag, and I'm not concerned at any of the transfers really outside of maybe a couple from the football program, because they're getting, we complain and fans complain all the time about SEC talent and getting SEC talent in. Well, if you're saying you need SEC talent in, then somebody's got to go.
Right.
And for the most part, I think that Stack has done a pretty good job, especially with how much was up in the air with Scottie Pippen Jr. and how much you could really do of trimming off the fat and bringing back what you could and then setting up complementary pieces. Now, what is he going to do about shooters and the 2 guard, and especially shooters now that Gabe Dorsey is gone? Because that was a guy I think both me and you thought could come in and provide maybe a little bit of depth just in case guys got in foul trouble, because he did have some good height. He showed flashes of being a good shooter last year. He didn't shoot a good percentage, but his shot looked good out of his hand. So they've got to pick up something, because right now there's just not enough guard depth on this team to be successful, because you're losing your 2 best guards from a team that already was short on guard depth. So there's a lot for Stackhouse to address. And I think you're a little too late to really address it here in this cycle.
No, what I was pointing to is kind of the difference in recruiting with Stackhouse. Like your first class, all of them are gone. And now, Stackhouse, I think that's kind of a credit to Stack in a weird way. All 3 of your guys are gone, but now you're putting more focus on the next recruiting class and other transfers. So we'll continue to monitor it, but that's the next question here. I mean, who does Stackhouse replace Gabe Dorsey with? So maybe it's a post player. They've got 7 guards and 7 forwards right now. So where does he go? Where does he go?
You're pretty late in the cycle.
Little late. So it might have to be a walk-on, potentially. That might be where he goes.
Well, you wouldn't give a Scully, I don't think.
He probably wouldn't. So who knows? Maybe who knows what?
I haven't seen anything. If anybody's got anything out there, send it over our way, because this is like the least rumors that I've ever heard surrounding what we both think is an open scholarship now. I would assume so, is an open scholarship with him transferring out. I don't know any names whatsoever. I've been looking around and I haven't really seen anything. So you're super late in the cycle here. I guess with
Maybe they
recruiting,
just
a lot of these guys are already committed.
Yeah, maybe they just leave it open. I mean, do teams do that? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe for Robbie Weinstein, if you're watching, hit us
Give
up
us
with
some
your
answers.
hit us up with your latest scoop here for Gabe Dorsey. But well, that does it for the first restream edition here of the Door Report, episode 160. Coming up, stay tuned on Twitter and YouTube if you've been watching. Rhett Wiseman is coming up, and Will, it's going to be Rhett and I, but shoot me your questions. And again, I think Vandy fans will like this because it's baseball talk. They like the football talk and basketball talk, I'm sure. But we got Rhett Wiseman coming up here on the Door Report, powered by Alaco Fine.